The snow began falling just after dusk, a slow, steady drift that coated the narrow roads of Greyford in white. By nightfall, the town was muffled under a thick, icy silence, broken only by the occasional whine of a passing car. Inside the community hall, yellow bulbs glowed against frosted windows. Laughter and muffled music seeped into the night air each time the door swung open. Mara Jennings stood near the coat rack, her scarf wrapped twice around her neck, watching Lavra Ellison bundle Ethan into his puffy blue jacket. Daniel was already by the door, tapping his car keys against his palm with a trace of impatience. "You sure you want to drive in this?" Mara asked, stepping closer. Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by the sound of people saying their goodbyes. Lavra smiled, but it was thin, the kind of smile you give to end a conversation you don't want to have. "We'll be fine, it's just a bit of snow." Mara hesitated. Lavra avoided her gaze, focusing instead on fixing Ethan's zipper. Something was off. It wasn't just the weather. Mara had felt it all evening, a subtle tension in Laura's posture, the way Daniel's hand would rest heavily on her shoulder, as if to remind her of his presence. Daniel opened the door, and the wind rushed in, scattering snowflakes across the wooden floor. "Let's go," he said. His tone left no room for negotiation. They stepped outside, the crunch of boots fading into the night. Mara pulled her phone from her coat pocket and sent a quick text. "Drive safe. Call me when you're home." She didn't expect an answer so soon, but only 10 minutes later, her phone buzzed. It was Lavra. Mara pressed it to her ear. "Hey," the line crackled, voices muffled by static and wind. She caught fragments. Storm getting worse. Ethan's tired. He's scared? Then Laura's voice lowered, urgent, almost whispering, "Mara. If something happens." The line went dead. Mara froze, staring at the dark road outside. Snow whipped against the glass like cold hands clawing for entry. She redialed, but there was no answer. After the third attempt, the call went straight to voicemail. She stood there for a long time, telling herself they'd just hit a patch of bad reception. It wasn't unusual in the hills. Still, a knot formed in her stomach, heavy and unyielding. Hours later, the storm swallowed the town completely. By morning, word spread quickly. The Ellisons never made it home. The sheriff's office sent out search teams. Snowmobiles carved paths through drifts. Volunteers scoured ditches and wooded trails. For days, they found nothing. No skid. Marks, no broken branches. No trace of the SUV. It was as if the family had been erased. The official report concluded they'd likely veered off the road in the storm, sliding into some remote ravine or frozen waterway. "Nature claimed them," one deputy said, his breath clouding in the frigid air. The search was called off within a week. Mara never believed it. She remembered that last phone call, Laura's voice, that hint of fear, the unfinished sentence. It wasn't the storm Lavra was afraid of. She was afraid of someone. Mara replayed it over and over in her mind, searching for meaning in the fragments she'd heard. But every time, it ended the same way, with that silence, for 12 years. Mara carried that night like an unhealed wound. Friends told her to move on. Even Laura's parents had accepted the official story, holding a memorial service with empty coffins. But Mara couldn't let go, because deep down she knew the snow didn't just swallow people. People could disappear, because someone wanted them gone, and sometimes the truth had a way of clawing its way back through the ice. For 12 winters, Greyford buried the Ellisons' disappearance beneath snowdrifts of silence. The town stopped speaking their names, as if avoiding the words could erase the memory. Only Mara kept their faces alive, framed on her bookshelf, tucked into a desk drawer at the school where she now worked as a counselor. But in early January 2020, as she sorted through permission slips and overdue assignments, a plain envelope slid under her office door. No stamp, no return address. Just her name written in an unfamiliar hand. Her fingers hesitated before breaking the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 4 words in block letters, "You were right," beneath it. Scrawled in smaller writing, almost as if added in haste. "Look beneath the ice at Greywater Lake." Her stomach knotted. Greywater Lake, 5 miles north, a wide, frozen expanse ringed by skeletal pines. Search teams had checked it in 2008, finding nothing. Why mention it now? And who would send this? She shoved the paper into her bag before the first bell rang, though its weight seemed to follow her all day. Every meeting, every student session, she could hear Laura's voice from that night again. The half-whisper cut off mid-dash sentence stopped by evening. The temperature had dropped sharply. A windstorm swept across town, rattling shutters and driving people indoors. But at Graywater Lake, the ice groaned under the shifting cold. A group of teenagers were walking their dogs along the shoreline when one of the animals, a restless Labrador, bolted toward the center. The dog's paws punched through a thin patch. A scream tore through the air as the boy ran after it. He managed to haul the dog out, but something beneath the ice caught his eye. A dark, unnatural shape. Word. Spread quickly. By the time Mara heard about it, flashing red and blue lights were already reflecting off the frozen surface. The sheriff's truck sat parked at the edge, the same man in charge of the case 12 years ago now stepping carefully across the ice with a flashlight. Mara kept to the shadows, watching as he crouched low, his being swept over the shape beneath the ice. Even from shore she could see it, the unmistakable outline of a vehicle. The lake had been frozen solid for weeks, but divers were called in anyway. The sheriff barked orders, though his face was pale. It was as if the years between had collapsed in on themselves, dragging the past into the present. A younger deputy muttered something about reopening the Ellison case. The sheriff shot him, a look sharp enough to cut glass. "We don't know whose it is," he said firmly. Though no one seemed convinced, Mara stepped forward, the wind tugging at her coat. She didn't want to speak, didn't want to give them reason to send her away, but the words forced themselves out. "You need to pull it up now, before the ice thickens again." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "We'll handle it." She recognized that tone. She'd heard it 12 years ago when she'd begged them to search longer, dig deeper, look in places they'd ignored. It was the same wall of authority, not to protect the truth, but to protect something else. She lingered until they packed up for the night, leaving the vehicle untouched until morning. The moonlight shimmered on the ice, outlining the buried shape like a ghost beneath glass. Driving home, she gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. Whoever sent that letter knew something, maybe everything. And if the SUV beneath Graywater Lake was what she thought it was, then the truth was about to surface. But Mara also knew something else. In Grayford, the truth didn't always survive daylight. The next morning, the ice at Graywater Lake groaned under the weight of the rescue crew. Floodlights turned the frozen surface into a stage of harsh white glare, casting long skeletal shadows across the snow. Mara stood at the edge, her breath fogging in the frigid air as divers in black neoprene eased themselves into a hole cut through the ice. The water swallowed them whole. For a few tense minutes, the only sounds were the hum of the generator and the crackle of the sheriff's radio. Then came the call, a distorted voice through the coms. "We've got contact with the vehicle." Cables were lowered, winches set in motion. Slowly, the lake began to surrender its secret. The SUV emerged coated in a glistening skin of ice, rust blooming across its frame. A cracked headlight dangled like a dead eye. The crowd that had gathered took a collective step back, as if the thing might lurch toward them. Mara's pulse thudded in her ears. The license plate, though corroded, was still legible. She didn't need to read it. She already knew. The divers stepped aside as a crime scene team swarmed. A pry bar snapped the driver's side door. Cold air spilled out, along with a smell that was not entirely erased by the years. Inside, 3 skeletal forms sat buckled. In place, 2 adults in the front, 1 small frame in the back. Mara gripped the railing of the observation platform. Laura's skull rested at an unnatural angle toward the passenger window. Daniel's head was forward, chin almost touching the steering wheel. Behind them, Ethan's tiny form seemed impossibly fragile, his seatbelt frayed and cleanly cut. The lead investigator leaned in, flashlight sweeping over the details. "Driver's side door," he murmured. "Locked from the outside." Mara's stomach dropped. That wasn't a storm. That was a trap. The sheriff shot the investigator. A look that said enough, but the whispers had already started among the crowd. Word would spread by nightfall, just like it had 12 years ago. Only this time the story was different. The vehicle was hoisted onto a flatbed and covered with a tarp, but the image was burned into Mara's mind. She kept replaying Ethan's seatbelt in her head. Someone had cut it. Why? To pull him free? To keep him in place? As the trucks rolled away, a reporter from the local paper tried to corner Mara. You were close to them, right? Did Lavra ever say who might have? Mara walked off without answering. Talking to the press wouldn't help Lavra now. She needed answers, and she wouldn't find them in a headline. Back at her car, Mara sat with the engine idling, staring at the frozen lake. She thought of the letter. You were right. Someone had known this was here the whole time. Someone had waited 12 years for this day, and if they knew, then maybe they also knew what had happened before the ice claimed the Ellisons. She put the car in gear and drove toward town. The road ahead vanishing into the swirling snow. There was one person who might still remember that night. The last person, outside of her, to see Lavra alive. Snow still dusted the streets of Greyford when Mara parked outside a weather-beaten convenience store on the edge of town. The hand-painted sign above the door read Blythe's Fuel and Goods. The red paint faded to pink. Inside, the air smelled faintly of oil, coffee, and mothballs. Henry Blythe was behind the counter, leaning on his elbows, reading an old newspaper. He looked smaller than Mara remembered. Wiry frame, face like creased parchment, a wool cap pulled low over his ears. He squinted when she stepped in. Well, I'll be. Haven't seen you in a long while, Mara Jennings. I need to ask you about the night the Ellisons disappeared, she said, not bothering with small talk. His eyes flickered with something between wariness and fatigue. That was a long time ago. I know, but you were working here that night, weren't you? Henry leaned back, sighing. Yeah, big storm, hardly anyone on the road, except them. Mara moved closer, lowering her voice. I saw the SUV. Pulled from Greywater Lake yesterday. 3 bodies inside. The driver's door was locked from the outside. Ethan's seatbelt was cut. Henry's hands tightened on the edge of the counter. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the Ancient fridge in the corner that wasn't in the papers. No, and that's why I need you to tell me everything you remember. Please, Henry. He hesitated, then nodded toward a dusty booth near the back. Come on, this ain't a conversation for the front counter. They slid into the booth. Henry rubbed his hands together, as if trying to warm them before speaking. It was late, close to midnight. They came in, Lavra, Daniel, the boy. Lavra bought hot chocolate for the kid. Daniel was topping off the gas. But there was someone else. Mara felt her chest tighten. Someone else? A man? Standing on the driver's side of the SUV, tall, heavy coat, hood up. I couldn't see his face. He wasn't with them in the store, just waiting. What was he doing? Talking. To Daniel, not friendly either. Couldn't hear what was said, but their body language, tense. Daniel's arms were stiff. That man kept leaning in, pointing toward the road. Did Lavra notice him? Henry shook his head. She stayed inside with the boy, looked uneasy though, kept glancing out the window. Mara's mind replayed the scene, Lavra inside with Ethan, Daniel outside with a stranger. Did Daniel seem scared? Henry's eyes sharpened. No, that's the thing. He didn't look scared. He looked mad. Like he was in the middle of an argument he didn't want anyone overhearing. Do you remember what direction they left in? Toward the lake road. Henry's voice dropped. That's why I never bought the storm accident story. Folks around here know that road ends at Greywater. Mara leaned forward. Why didn't you tell the police this 12 years ago? Henry's jaw tightened. I did. Next day. The sheriff came in, thanked me, and said they'd look into it. Weeks later, he told me I must have been mistaken, that I probably saw someone else that night after that. I figured there was no point in talking. She recognized the quiet bitterness in his voice. Henry, that man, if you saw him again, could you recognize him? He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Maybe, if he's still around. Mara's phone buzzed in her coat pocket, a text from an unknown number. Just 2 words, "He's watching." She glanced toward the front windows. The street outside was empty, but her skin prickled. Henry noticed her expression. "You okay?" "Yeah," she lied, slipping the phone back into her pocket. "Thanks, Henry. You've been a big help." She stood to leave, but her mind was already racing. If there had been another man that night, and if Daniel hadn't been afraid, then maybe this wasn't just a random encounter. Maybe it was something Daniel had invited or provoked, and that meant the next step was clear. She needed to know exactly who Daniel Ellison had been when the snow swallowed him. Mara didn't sleep that night. Henry's words kept replaying, overlapping with the anonymous text still burning on her phone. "He's watching by morning." The snow had stopped, leaving the world pale and silent, except inside her head, where questions kept multiplying. If Daniel had been angry, not afraid, then maybe that man at the gas station wasn't a threat to him. Maybe he was someone Daniel knew. Someone Daniel trusted. Mara started at the library's dusty public computer terminal. She pulled up archived bank statements from the Ellison estate records, public now that the case had been officially declared a closed accident years ago. It didn't take long to spot them. Monthly deposits into an account she'd never heard Lavra mention. The amounts varied, sometimes a few $100s, sometimes several thousand. The account wasn't joint. It was Daniel's alone. Her stomach knotted as she scrolled further. Withdrawals appeared at strange intervals, often on days Daniel had told Lavra he was working late or helping a friend out of town. The dates matched another record she stumbled across, receipts from a motel off Route 17. A good 40 minutes away, the name on the receipts made her pause. Celeste Ward. Mara knew that name. Everyone in Grayford did. Celeste was from Briars Hollow, the next town over, glamorous in a brittle way, with a reputation for stirring trouble. But the bigger problem was her husband, Jonas Ward, a man whose bar fights and police run-ins had been whispered about for years. Mara sat back, feeling her pulse in her throat. If Daniel had been meeting Celeste in secret, it was more than betrayal. It was dangerous. She printed the records, tucking them into her coat, and drove to Briars Hollow. The Ward house was a low, sprawling ranch with peeling paint and a row of dead rose bushes out front. A muddy pickup truck sat in the driveway. She knocked. The door cracked open, revealing Celeste, older now, but still sharp-featured, her eyes pale blue and cool. She looked Mara up and down before speaking. "Can I help you?" "My name's Mara Jennings. I was Lavra Ellison's friend." Something flickered across Celeste's face, recognition, maybe guilt, before it smoothed over. That was a long time ago. "I know Daniel was meeting you before they disappeared," Mara said plainly. "I have proof." Celeste's lips tightened. "You should leave." "Did Jonas know?" Mara pressed. Celeste stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind her. "You have no idea what you're walking into. Then tell me." For a long moment, Celeste said nothing. Her gaze drifted toward the tree line, as if she expected someone to step out. Finally, she spoke, voice low. "Daniel wasn't who you thought. He told me he was going to leave her, that he had money saved, and we'd start over somewhere else. But Jonas found out." Mara's breath caught, and the next day, Daniel stopped returning my calls. That night, they vanished. Celeste's eyes locked onto hers, hard and unblinking. "You think Jonas had something to do with it? Maybe you're right. But if you keep digging, you won't just be digging into the past. You'll be digging your own grave." Before Mara could reply, the front door yanked open. Jonas Ward filled the doorway, tall, broad, with a face weathered like old leather. His voice was low but dangerous. "Something wrong here?" "No," Celeste said quickly. She was just leaving. Mara walked back to her car, resisting the urge to look behind her. Jonas's gaze followed her all the way to the driver's seat. When she finally turned the key, her hands were trembling. She had more than she'd started with: proof of the affair, a motive for violence, and the shadow of a man known for it, but she also had the creeping certainty that someone really was watching her. And as she pulled away, she noticed a black sedan 2 cars behind. Pulling out right after her, the black sedan in her rear view. Stayed with her for 3 turns before peeling off toward the highway. Marat's grip loosened, but the unease didn't. The next morning she called Celeste, her voice sharper than she intended. "We need to finish our conversation, away from your house." Celeste agreed, reluctantly, and they met at a diner off Route 17. The snow outside reflected pale light through the blinds. Striping Celeste's face as she stirred her coffee without drinking it, Mara slid into the booth opposite her. "You said Daniel promised to leave Lavra for you? But you didn't mention he ended things before they disappeared." Celeste's eyes flicked up. "Because you didn't ask." She set down the spoon. 3 weeks before they vanished, he told me it was over. Said it was a mistake, that he needed to protect his family. I thought it was just guilt talking. But then he said something else. "What?" "That she found out?" Mara frowned. "Lavra?" Celeste nodded slowly. "I think she knew about us, but it wasn't just that. Lavra called me the night they disappeared. The air in the diner seemed to still." "She called you?" "Yes, around 9 p.m. her voice was shaking. She said, 'Jonas knows everything,' then the line went dead." Marat's pulse quickened. "Did you tell the police?" Celeste laughed bitterly. "Do you think they'd believe me? I was the married woman sleeping with her husband. They would have painted me as the villain." "Maybe you were," Mara said quietly. Celeste's jaw tightened. "Maybe, but Jonas, he's not a man you cross. If he knew, he wouldn't just come for me. He'd go for anyone involved." Mara studied her, looking for cracks in the story. "So Jonas knew Daniel." "He knew the Ellisons." Celeste shook her head. "That's what's strange. He always claimed he didn't, said he never met them. But I saw the way he reacted when their names came up. Like someone had kicked him in the gut." Later that afternoon, Mara drove to Jonas's garage, a squat metal building reeking of oil and gasoline. Jonas was leaning under the hood of a truck when she arrived. He looked up, eyes flat. "Something I can help you with?" "I want to ask about the Ellisons," Mara said. His mouth curled in a humorless smile. "Never met, not what Celeste says." "Celeste talks too much." He wiped his hands on a rag, then leaned closer. "You're poking at something that's been buried a long time, counselor. Maybe keep it that way." Mara didn't flinch. "Where were you the night they disappeared?" Jonas's gaze sharpened. "Home, alone." "Anyone who can confirm that?" A beat of silence. "Don't need anyone. I know where I was." She left before he could see her shaking hands. His alibi was as thin as the ice that had once hidden the SUV, and she could feel him weighing whether she was worth letting walk away. That night, Mara spread out her notes across her kitchen table. The bank records, motel receipts, Celeste's account, and Jonas's brittle denials. Lavra had called Celeste hours before vanishing. If Jonas knew, the timeline tightened like a noose. Through her window, she saw movement on the street, a figure standing half in shadow, watching her house. When she blinked, it was gone. She didn't sleep. By morning, she'd made her decision. If Jonas wouldn't talk, she'd find someone who would. Someone who'd been there that night. The cold was sharper in the morning, the kind that cut through gloves and lodged in the bones. Mara drove toward the edge of town, to a weather-worn house with sagging shutters and a "for sale" sign leaning in the yard. Retired Deputy Harold Keene had been avoiding her calls for a week. But when she stepped onto his porch, the door cracked open before she could knock. A pale eye studied her. "You're Ellison's friend," he said. Not a question, Mara nodded. "I think you know something." He hesitated, then let her in. The house smelled faintly of dust and old tobacco. Harold moved slowly, as though each step was calculated against some invisible pain. He motioned her toward the couch, but didn't sit. "I saw Jonas Ward's pickup near the lake road that night," he said without preamble. Mara's breath caught. "You're sure?" Harold's gaze hardened. Old F250 green dent on the passenger door. Nobody else in town had one like it. Parked half off the road, lights out. I pulled up behind, thinking maybe he was broke down. And Jonas came from the trees. Harold's jaw worked as if chewing on the memory. Told me he'd hit a deer. Sod, he didn't need help. I remember thinking he looked flushed, like he'd been running. I offered to call it in, but he got real sharp. Said he'd handle it. Mara leaned forward. Why didn't you report it? I did, Harold said, voice tight, to Sheriff Doyle. And? His eyes dropped to the floor. Doyle told me to leave. It alone said Jonas's truck had been parked at his garage all night. I knew that was a lie, but he exhaled, the air shuddering out of him. Doyle's his cousin? Blood's thicker than truth around here. Mara's fingers clenched against her notebook. So you dropped it. I dropped it because the last guy who crossed Jonas ended up in the A with a busted jaw and no witnesses. And because Doyle made it clear my badge didn't make me untouchable. Why tell me now? She asked. Harold finally sat, the couch springs groaning under his weight. Because I'm selling this place and leaving, got no ties left, and maybe I'm tired of keeping other people's sins warm. He met her eyes. But you need to understand Jonas won't hesitate, and Doyle's not going to protect you. Mara closed her notebook slowly. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. She realized Harold's confession wasn't just a key to the past. It was a warning about the present. When she stepped outside, the snow had started again, flakes catching in her hair. Across the street, a man in a dark coat stood in the shadow of a maple tree, head tilted toward her. She froze. Friend of yours? Harold asked from the doorway, but when Mara turned to answer, the space under the tree was empty. Driving home, she replayed Harold's words. Jonas near the lake road, Doyle covering for him. It wasn't just negligence, it was deliberate burial. Every official report she'd trusted for 12 years was compromised. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. No caller ID, she answered. Low voice rasped. You're asking the wrong questions. Then the line went dead. Mara kept driving, but the road ahead felt narrower, the snow thicker. The case wasn't just reopening, it was dragging her into the same shadows that had swallowed the ELLISONS. And somewhere in those shadows, Jonas was waiting. The police station felt colder than the air outside, though the radiator clicked and hissed somewhere deep in the walls. Mara signed her name on the visitor log, acutely aware of the way the desk sergeant's eyes followed her. Ever since the car came up from Greywater Lake, every step she took inside these walls felt like trespassing. She'd come to check an old evidence file, but the officer on duty, a young patrolman named Ellis, hesitated. Most of that's sealed, he said, his voice low. I just need to see the Ellison belongings, Mara replied steady. 12 years of dust doesn't change the fact they were my friends. Something in her tone must have worked. Minutes later, Ellis returned with a cardboard box. The lid sagging under water stains and frayed tape. Inside were relics of a family frozen in time. Laura's scarf, stiff with age. Daniel's wallet, leather cracked. Ethan's small red backpack, its zipper crusted with rust. Mara's hand hovered before touching it. She remembered the boy wearing it to school. The straps almost too tight over his winter coat. The zipper resisted, but finally gave way with a tearing sound. Inside, she found a bundle of notebooks and loose papers, the edges warped from water. Most were blank or smeared beyond recognition, but one small spiral-bound journal remained legible in parts. She turned the pages carefully, breathing shallow, as if exhaling too hard might erase the fragile ink. The entries were childish. I got an A in math. Mom made chili for dinner. We saw a fox by the road. Then, near the end, the handwriting grew shakier. Dad says we have to leave. Mom is crying. Mara's fingers stilled. She turned the page. The last line, written in uneven, blotched letters, read, A man is following us. The words seemed to hum in her skull. It wasn't just a snowstorm. They weren't just lost. They were running, and they didn't make it. Mara glanced up toward the evidence room's glass wall. The patrolman was gone, but she suddenly had the sense she wasn't alone. Somewhere beyond the hall, the faint creak of a door echoed. She slid the journal into her bag. She'd return it, she told herself, but not before she read every word again. As she walked toward the exit, the voices of two officers drifted from the stairwell. Shouldn't have let her in there. She's digging holes she doesn't know how to fill. Their words tightened something in her chest, but she kept walking. Outside, the snow was falling heavier, blanketing the town in a deceptive calm. Mara sat in her car, the journal open on the passenger seat. She studied Ethan's last entry, tracing the grooves his small hand had pressed into the paper. If Ethan had seen a man following them, it meant someone had been close enough to be noticed by a frightened 9-year-old. It meant Jonas's truck at the lake road wasn't a coincidence. And it meant whatever happened next. Daniel might have known it was coming. She imagined Lavra in the passenger seat, tears freezing on her cheeks, glancing over her shoulder into the white blur behind them. The image sent a shiver up Mara's spine. Her phone buzzed. Another blocked number. She almost let it go to voicemail but answered anyway, a whisper this time, barely audible over static. "Stop looking for him." The line went dead. Mara sat in silence, snow ticking against the windshield. She wasn't just chasing the truth anymore. The truth had started chasing her, and if Ethan was right, the man following them might not be finished the next morning. Mara stood on the edge of Greywater Lake, the cold so sharp it felt like it was slicing through her coat. The police had cordoned off the area again, blue and white tape fluttering in the wind. Detective Ramos waved her over. "We're going to walk the route," he said. "The same one they took that night? You should be there?" Mara hesitated. Her breath hung in the air like smoke. The blocked phone call still rang in her head. Stop looking for him, but she followed. They started at the old community hall, its sagging roof heavy with snow. A convoy of police vehicles trailed slowly behind the lead car, where Ramos narrated their route based on the original case files. The snowfall was lighter today, but in her mind Mara saw the night of December 2008, wind whipping against the glass, Laura's knuckles white on the dash. Ethan's frightened eyes in the rearview mirror. A mile out of town, Ramos stopped the convoy. "This is where it starts to get strange," he said. He produced a laminated set of photographs taken during the initial investigation. Mara leaned closer. In the pale light of the old flashbulbs, the road was carved with 2 sets of tire marks, running parallel for several yards before one angled sharply toward the ditch and toward the lake road. "That second set," Ramos said, tapping the photo, "doesn't match the Ellison's SUV, wider track, heavier tread. So someone forced them off? That's one theory," he glanced at her. "But nobody ever bothered to prove it." They continued. Down the lake road, the trees closed in overhead, their branches skeletal and black. Even in daylight, the narrow path felt like a tunnel dot at the water's edge. A dive team was suiting up. Mara watched as they descended into the dark hole cut through the ice, vanishing one by one. She wrapped her arms tighter, trying to shake. Off the image of the submerged SUV she'd seen pulled from that same lake, minutes passed. Then a diver broke the surface, handing up a mesh evidence bag. Inside was a small metal tool, its surface slick with silt. Another diver emerged, this one holding a section of the SUV's driver's side latch assembly. Ramos took it, studying the grooves along the edge. "Fresh," he muttered. "Definitely not from '08, Mara frowned. "You're saying someone's been down there since?" He nodded grimly. "And look at this." He turned the latch toward her. Deep scratches marred the mechanism, the metal bent inward. "These marks? That's what happens when you jam the lock from the outside. Somebody wanted to make damn sure no one got out before it went under." The words sank into Mara like stones. Ethan's journal entry, "A man is following us," wasn't just a child's fear. It had been a warning. Around them, the ice creaked under its own weight. The divers went down again, the ripples spreading slowly across the black water. Mara looked back down the road they had come. The second set of tire tracks, the forced lock, the silence from the people who should have spoken up 12 years ago, it all pointed to one thing. Someone in this town had hunted the Ellisons that night, and someone else had made sure the truth stayed buried. A shout from the water snapped her head around. One of the divers was waving frantically toward the surface. Ramos's radio crackled. "We've got something else down here." Mara stepped closer to the hole in the ice, heart pounding. Whatever they'd found, She had the sickening feeling it wasn't going to make anything easier. The object the divers hauled up wasn't a weapon. It was a key ring, crusted with rust, the leather fob worn but still bearing faint gold letters. J.W. Jonas. Ward. Mara stared at it until the world seemed to narrow into a tunnel. When she looked up, Ramos was already watching her. His expression a mixture of grim certainty and exhaustion. 2 hours later, she was standing on Jonas's front porch. The old farmhouse sat at the edge of the frozen marshland, its roof bowed under years of neglect. The front door opened before she could knock. Jonas filled the frame, broad shoulders, thick arms, eyes like chips of ice. "What do you want?" His voice was a growl. She held up the evidence bag. "This was in the lake, near their SUV. His gaze flickered just for a second. "So? It has your initials, and your cousin was sheriff back then?" "I think you were there that night, Jonas." His jaw tightened. "Careful, Mara. Careful is what kept 3 people in a lake for 12 years. Her words came out sharper than she intended. "I know you followed them. I know you forced them off the road." The wind moaned across the frozen yard. Jonas stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in, before the neighbors start watching." Inside, the air smelled of stale tobacco and old oil. He sank into a sagging armchair, gesturing for her to sit. "She didn't. They said I had a temper," Jonas began, rubbing a hand over his face. "Maybe I did, but that night, I just wanted to talk to him. Teach him a lesson about screwing around with another man's wife." Mara's stomach twisted. "By running them off the road?" His eyes flashed. They wouldn't stop. He was acting like I didn't exist. Like he could take what he wanted and laugh in my face, so yeah, I followed them. I pulled ahead, tried to get him to pull over. "And when he didn't?" Jonas's voice dropped. "The snow was coming down hard. I swerved in front. They went off toward the lake road." He stared at the floor. "I thought they'd stop. But they didn't just slide." "In, did they?" Mara's words were quiet but sharp. Jonas's breathing slowed. "I went down after them. Daniel was banging on the window, yelling at me to help. I panicked." Mara's pulse hammered in her ears. "You locked the door." His head jerked up. "I didn't want them running at me. I figured I'd get help." "You locked the door," she repeated, the tremor in her voice, betraying the cold rage building in her chest. Jonas's hands trembled on the armrests. "It was an accident they went under, I swear it." But Mara heard it, that fatal slip. "Not if he'd locked the door, but why, outside, a cracking sound split the air." Jonas looked toward the window. "Ice is breaking early this year," he muttered, almost to himself. Mara backed toward the door. Her phone was recording in her pocket. His words were there, preserved, but so was his size, his anger, his unpredictable edge. As she stepped out into the biting wind, Jonas called after her. "You think you've got the truth?" "Be careful, Mara. Ice can give way under anyone." The door slammed. She hurried toward her car, but the sound of footsteps behind her made the hair on her neck rise. The footsteps had belonged to Deputy Ramos. He'd followed Mara from the farmhouse, hand resting on his sidearm, eyes locked on Jonas's. "Porch, we got enough," he said quietly. "You okay?" Mara nodded, though her pulse hadn't slowed. By nightfall, flashing lights painted the snowdrifts red and blue. Jonas was led from his home in handcuffs, his jaw set in defiance. Neighbors gathered at the fence line, their voices carrying in the frigid air, some muttering relief, others spitting accusations that it was all a setup. The news spread quickly through town. At the diner, old men hunched over coffee claimed Jonas had been railroaded. At the school, parents whispered that justice had finally come. Mara felt each word like a stone thrown into still water, ripples that would never quite fade. In the quiet of her kitchen, she listened to the recording again. Jonas's voice, rough with anger, sealed his fate. "I locked the door." She'd sent it to Ramos, but hearing it again filled her with no satisfaction, only a cold hollowness, because under it all there was Daniel, his lies, his secret meetings with Celeste, his arrogance that had drawn Jonas's fury. And Lavara caught in the middle. trying to hold a family together while the ground crumbled beneath her. Mara remembered Laura's voice on the phone that last night, trembling but steady enough to say, "If anything happens, take care of Ethan." Back then, Mara thought it was paranoia. Now she knew better. 2 days later, she drove to the cemetery. The snow lay heavy over the graves, each one marked by a crooked row of wind-beaten flags from the last Memorial Day. Laura's stone was simple: beloved wife and mother. Gone too soon. She knelt, brushing snow from its base. From her coat pocket, she pulled Ethan's small, water-damaged journal. The leather was cracked, the pages warped. She had read it enough times to know the last entry by heart. "Dad says we have to leave. Mom is crying. A man is following us." Mara set the journal against the headstone, the wind tugging at its cover. "I found him, Lavar," she whispered. "And I'm sorry it took this long." For a moment, the world was still, just the sound of the wind skimming over the snow. Then a shadow fell across the grave. Ramos stood a few paces away, hands in his pockets. "Thought I might find you here," he said. "They'll argue about it forever," Mara murmured. "Whether he's a murderer or a man who lost control? Doesn't change what happened," Ramos replied. "Or who caused it?" She nodded but didn't move. The cold seeped through her gloves, but she stayed kneeling, watching the journal shift slightly in the breeze. It looked so small against the marble. "Trial's going to be ugly," Ramos added. "People will be taking sides. You should be ready for that." Mara finally rose, dusting snow from her knees. "I've been ready since the day they disappeared." They walked back to the road in silence. As Ramos opened his cruiser door, Mara glanced over her shoulder at the grave. Something about leaving the journal there felt right, like it belonged. With Lavar not locked away in an evidence room, but as she slid into her car, she saw movement near the cemetery fence. A man stood watching, face obscured by a scarf and cap, his breath fogging in the cold. When she blinked, he turned and walked into the line of trees. Mara's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Jonas was in custody. So who was watching her? Now? The man by the cemetery fence had vanished into the pines, leaving only the sharp smell of cold air and the steady fall of snow. Mara sat in her car for a long minute, heart pounding, before starting the engine. The tires crunched over the frozen gravel, each sound too loud in the stillness. She didn't tell Ramos. Not yet. She didn't know if it had been a trick of the light, a stranger passing through, or something more deliberate. But the unease followed her, curling tight in her chest as she drove toward Greywater Lake. By the time she reached the shore, the storm had thinned to a fine powder, drifting in. Slow spirals to the ground. The lake lay before her, a vast, pale expanse already locking under a fresh crust of ice. Somewhere beneath its surface, silt still clung to the scars of tire tracks, metal and bone. The spot where they'd hauled the Ellison's SUV from the depths was marked only by a faint discoloration in the ice, as if the water itself remembered. Mara stood at the edge, breath clouding in the air, and imagined the weight of the vehicle sinking. The terrible stillness when it settled into the black dot. Jonas was behind bars now, his confession recorded, his trial looming. Yet the memory of the anonymous letter pressed on her mind. You were right. Look beneath the ice at Greywater Lake. Someone had known, and not just about the lake, but about her suspicion, her refusal to let the case rest. She had asked Ramos about tracing the letter, but it had been typed, the envelope postmarked from a sorting center miles away. No fingerprints, no witnesses. A ghostly hand reaching from the shadows to point her toward the truth, or toward a truth someone wanted her to find. The wind shifted, carrying a faint, high sound over the frozen water. At first she thought it was the groan of ice settling, but then she heard it again, light, breathless, unmistakable, laughter, a child's, her breath caught. The sound came from nowhere and everywhere at once, woven into the whisper of snow through the reeds. She knew it was impossible, but the timbre was burned into her memory. Ethan's laugh. The one that rose in hiccuping bursts when he thought something was truly funny. She closed her eyes. You found him, Lavara. You found the truth. The words felt hollow, Truth was supposed to be solid, but here at the lake's edge it was brittle as the forming ice, ready to crack under the wrong weight. When she opened her eyes again, flakes swirled thickly, blurring the opposite shore. In that white haze, she thought she saw a figure standing on the far bank, still, watching, just like the man at the cemetery. She blinked, and the shape dissolved into the snowfall. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a blocked number. She answered, but there was only silence on the other end. Silence, and the faint rush of wind, like the sound sweeping over the ice around her. Then the line went dead. Mara stared at the phone screen, her pulse thudding in her ears. Jonas might have locked the Ellisons in that SUV, but someone else had nudged her toward uncovering it. And whoever that was hadn't disappeared with the first snow. The lake stretched before her, deceptively calm, sealing over its wounds. But beneath, the water held everything, the weight of a car, the whispers of the dead, and perhaps more secrets yet to be pulled into the light. Snow began to cover her footprints as she turned back toward her car. Behind her, the ice gave. A deep, resonant crack that echoed across the empty expanse. The past, she thought, never fully sinks. It just waits for the thaw.